He described the terror legislation as complex and incoherent and said it should be reviewed by the Law Commission. He said it was almost impossible to apply to domestic terrorists. The Attorney-General, Dr. Michael Cullen, indicated that he has full confidence in the Solicitor-General and agreed to have the terror legislation reviewed by the Law Commission. The following questions might need to be answered by the concerned quarters before people can even begin to believe the official version of events. Why did the police wait for the camp to break up and the campers to go home before moving in? Logically and logistically, it would make sense to swoop down on the camp, already under surveillance, and arrest the participants in one fell swoop. Why would the police rather let the participants go home to all corners of the country and then send raiding parties to search their homes and arrest them? Or was that one of the aims, to search the homes? For fishing purposes, perhaps? Or to terrorize those with whom the targeted individuals shared their lives? Or was the purpose behind waiting for the campers to go home to organize the siege of Ruatoki and to inflame passions with acts like setting up the roadblock on the confiscation line? Or were the Tuhoi targeted because of their history and their special pride in their Maori heritage, expecting them to retaliate and provide justification for police raids after the fact?
Tell us why the word terror has become so much synonymous within the daily lives of the people around the world.
Well, I think it has because of American foreign policy, first of all, which has been directed at, I guess, the control of the world's resources and the world's minerals in the interests of especially the big corporations, the big American corporations, but also European corporations. They really want control of those resources, so their policies have been to really ignore local people, and under the guise of promoting democracy, they will overthrow governments, they will behave in a pretty appalling fashion, and that's built a huge resistance among the people of those countries. And often when they can't fight back, they don't have the guns or the armies to fight back with, they will sometimes fight back with suicide bombers and with guerrilla tactics, I suppose, which are interpreted as terrorism.
Who is or who isn't a terrorist? Now, I'm speaking as someone who back in 1981 was on Muldoon's SIS subversive list. I will stand on my track record, and others will as well. For ordinary people, the way our society works is those who have the gold make the rules. That's how it works. So if ordinary people want to bring about change, it is the social justice activists that help play the leading role in helping to get improvements for ordinary people. Now what is happening is, as social justice activists, we are being criminalised. Protest and dissent, the effect of what has happened at Ruatoki is to criminalise dissent. It is outrageous. It is outrageous. There's no place for this in a so-called democracy.
These questions portend some very tough times ahead for the Maori and other minorities in ANZUS. For instance, what would be the reaction if, say, there is some kind of violent incident, a failed assassination attempt perhaps, or a crude homemade explosive that fails to go off in the coming days? Media will quickly spread the news that Maori, angered by the police raids, have taken to violence. Police might make some more arrests, this time of Maori and most likely some Muslims, and we will have the elusive connection of the Maori with the Al-Qaeda. One can expect further raids in Australia and the USA, which will arrest more Maoris and more Muslims, and the connection will be cemented in the public psyche. After that, whatever Dr. Sharples or Hone Urewera or other elders might say, Maori will be fair game in the war on terror. All the empowerment of the Maori as a community that seems to have happened in the recent past will be taken away in a flash.
We're not a terrorist target, and we don't have terrorists in New Zealand, but we've had the opportunity not to be sucked into this whole war on terror here. We didn't join the war against Iraq, and I think most of the world has a respect for us which they don't have for the policies of America or Australia or Britain. We've taken a much more responsible position, so we're not part of the we shouldn't be part of the so-called war on terror. we have the opportunity of stepping right outside of that. But unfortunately what the government's done is it's passed laws not just to meet our United Nations responsibilities, which we had to do, but they've gone way beyond that, and they've put in all of these about 6 or 7 pieces of legislation to increase surveillance of the population, massively increase resources for the police and the Security Intelligence Service, and at the same time take away civil liberties from New Zealanders. Now, we didn't need to buy into all of that, and what we're seeing with the raids over the past 3 weeks has been the level of investigation dropping right down until it's catching people involved in ordinary political activity, because that's what we're talking about here.
We do not want to see New Zealand turned into a police state, and that we're really concerned about the attacks on our civil liberties. It's huge.
What are the implications and ramifications of the Terrorism Suppression Act on New Zealanders?
Well, the Terrorism Suppression Act has got huge ramifications for New Zealand. For example, it has a very low threshold definition of terrorism. A terrorist is anybody who disrupts an infrastructure facility where human life may be endangered. So if you think about that, if the Terrorism Suppression Act 2002 had been in place in 1981, then many of the protests against the Springbok tour would now be regarded as terrorism. For example, I was involved in a group of people that we went and sat on the runway at Rotorua Airport, and we thought the Springbok plane was coming in. And now, if that happened today, under this law, people would say, well, that's disrupting an infrastructure facility, and it could lead to loss of human life because a plane mightn't be able to land. Now, that would be a terrorist activity, and I don't think that's what New Zealanders want, and I don't think that's what we realise is happening. I think our eyes have been blurred by belief that we're caught up in George Bush's war, and we're not.
Before anyone shouts conspiracy theory, we might remind ourselves what George Tenet, former CIA director, had said in response to accusations that the CIA had got it wrong in the Iraqi pre-war intelligence. He had said that when an intelligence agency gets some information, it lets its analysts have a look at it. The analysts join the dots to make a picture that they think reflects the possible reality. Tennant had said that if some of his analysts had said Iraq possessed weapons of mass destruction, some other analysts of his had said that Saddam might be just bluffing. The bottom line being that no one can say the CIA completely got it right, nor can they say the CIA got it completely wrong. The term conspiracy theory is bandied about when the analytical techniques of the intelligence agencies are used by laymen. You have some dots and you connect them in the way you think they should. Maori being branded terrorists is one of the possibilities. Hopefully it would never happen, but it is quite easy for this possibility to eventuate. The Maori leadership should be aimed at communicating it to the wider New Zealand society and the world that the Maori, although angered at the way the raids were conducted, believe in seeking solutions within the ambit of this country's and international laws. Anyone who indulges in any kind of violent act should be considered an agent provocateur who wants to defame the whole Maori community. It is a pity that if an intelligence agency wants to create a rift on racial lines in the New Zealand society, they only need engineer one violent act and arrange for circumstantial evidence to point the finger of suspicion at a group of Maori, and we will have racial tension ripping the fabric of New Zealand society. Let us hope that the SIS is up to the job to prevent any such plans from some unnamed intelligence agency. Noted lawyer Moana Jackson termed the so-called police raids as back in the mists of fear. He recalled what Karaitiana Rarere and Ngāti Kahungunu said in 1916. Quote, "I weep for what has just happened at Mangata Pohatu in Tuhoi. The police raid seems to be about punishing Kenana for questioning the Crown and will only take us back to the mists of fear and doubt. I wonder if we will ever stop worrying when it might happen again." End quotes. The events that have unfolded since the recent anti-terrorist Operation 8 in Tuhoi and elsewhere have left many whānau and communities confused, hurt and traumatised. Politicians have urged people to withhold comment or criticism until the judicial process has been played out. But the flaws in the process to date, plus the very real hurt that has been caused, particularly in the Maori community, calls for some clarification. He says that the fact that the Crown and other agencies such as the Police Association have continually made self-serving and often inaccurate comment has increased the confusion and made the need for clarity even more pressing.
On the nationwide police raids invoking the Anti-Terror Suppression Act, in hindsight, how do you feel about the entire episode?
Well, firstly, it's a police operation. The government does not control police operations. Secondly, it would be highly likely that charges would be laid under our firearms legislation. My understanding is that the reason the police also sought warrants under the Terrorism Suppression Act was that if in the course of uncovering evidence they found suggestions that there had been terrorist like acts in the process of being planned, then they couldn't have laid charges under that act if they had not sought warrants under it. So the jury is out as to whether the police actually will seek to lay charges under the Terrorism Suppression Act or only under the firearms legislation. To lay charges under the Terrorism Suppression Act, they must get the consent of the Solicitor-General. He is the government's most senior lawyer, he is not a politician, and he will apply a high test of what is appropriate.
As an organisation, the police are very much evidence-based, and I think that some evidence was gathered and put before our Commissioner. The Commissioner looked at that evidence under the Arms Act and saw that some offences had been committed under the Arms Act. But as far as the Terrorism Suppression Act is concerned, that's a matter for the the Attorney-General, who passes that down to the Solicitor-General to make any decisions around anything to do with the Terrorism Suppression Act. So that's not a decision for us, it's a decision for the Solicitor-General.
But in the way the police acted, even if it is firearms related incidents, hooded police, fully armed, the fear-mongering tactics have come to the shores to rest. I mean, they are pretty apprehensive. What do you have to say to that?
I think what people need to do is to reserve their judgment until the evidence is put before the courts, so that people, and particularly in the court setting, can see what evidence is actually there. And I think then people will be very quickly be able to make their own assessments on what risks were happening out there.
And we're here at the Prime Minister's electorate office to protest against the hypocrisy of Helen Clark, very concerned about what's happening with human rights violations in Fiji, yet she is part of human rights violations happening under her nose in her own electorate with this terrorism suppression bill. This bill is going to give the Prime Minister basically the right to decide who is or isn't a terrorist, and she has already spoken out against people in Ruatoki in a way that is very prejudicial to the justice system. And basically we're here because we do not want to see New Zealand turned into a police state, and that we're really concerned about the attacks on our civil liberties. It's huge.
At the very least, these people were guilty of using illicit weapons, of making napalm, of making Molotov cocktails. Now, that is an appalling thing for a Prime Minister to say, because what she's saying is, forget about the evidence, forget about a fair trial, forget about innocent and proven guilty. I know these people are guilty, and she's telling the whole country they're guilty. So she's taking a blatantly partisan position in favour of the police when none of this evidence has been tested in court. Now that's a breach of the rights of these people, and I don't think Helen Clark can be trusted in that role as Prime Minister. It's an appalling statement to make, and particularly because she now wants even more power. She wants the power to decide who is a terrorist, and then keep the power to review that decision, whereas at the moment that decision is with the High Court. So there's more and more power being concentrated in the Prime Minister, and I think that she's shown last week that she simply is not responsible enough to hold that power.
We will always deploy the Armed Offenders Squad where there is a risk that there may be firearms involved. So the staff that were deployed were the appropriate staff.
It's inevitable when the police conduct these raids, they close down that community in Eastern Bay.
Logistically, it would make sense to swoop down on the camp, already under surveillance, and arrest the participants in one fell swoop. Why would the police rather let the participants go home to all corners of the country and then send raiding parties to search their homes and arrest them? Or was that one of the aims? To search? Or were the Tuhoi targeted because of their history and their special pride in their Maori heritage, expecting them to retaliate and provide justification for police raids after the fact?
Tell us why the word terror has become so much synonymous within the daily lives of the people around the world.
And reviewed by the Law Commission. The following questions might need to be answered by the concerned quarters before people can even begin to believe the official version of events. Why did the police wait for the camp to break up and the campers to go home before moving in? Logically, and the homes. For fishing purposes, perhaps, or to terrorize those with whom the targeted individuals shared their lives? Or was the purpose behind waiting for the campers to go home to organize the siege of Ruatoki and to inflame passions with acts like setting up the roadblock on the confiscation line? He described the terror legislation as complex and incoherent and said it should be reviewed by the Law Commission. He said it was almost impossible to apply to domestic terrorists. The Attorney-General, Dr. Michael Cullen, indicated that he has full confidence in the Solicitor-General and agreed to have the terror legislation